Welcome to Healthy Living Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Kaufman. And one of my favorite guests and friends and confidants, Dr. Kelly Brogan, returns today to speak about the topics in her new book, The Reclaimed Woman. And this really juxtaposes quite nicely with research that I've done the last couple of months related to my True Masculinity series. So it'll be great to look at the woman's perspective since we have examined certainly the consequences and the state of masculinity for us men in today's society. So I want to get into this topic also from the feminine perspective. So it's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Kelly Brogan to the stage. How are you, Kelly?
Hello, sir. I'm delighted to be in conversation. I'm just reflecting on the very disparate paths that you and I have traveled to get to such similar terrain. Like that we're having this conversation of all the conversations. And I know because of our personal conversations, like how much we have come to see these dynamics, man woman relating and associated dynamics so similarly. So it's such a pleasure to be in conversation.
Yeah, well, I mean, it really goes from professional to philosophical to personal. We've had many parallels and, some similar experiences, especially with perhaps some less than successful romantic relationships.
My greatest credential.
So it's natural that we should be talking about this, and I'm, really glad that I have delved into this material and subject matter, from a scholarly point of view to integrate with my own experience, from being a therapist too, because I was introduced to some of these concepts, but it's a deeper, much deeper understanding now of the context. So maybe we could start off, what's your intention or your goals with this book before we get into the particular subject matter?
I think you would concur that there is only so far you can get with self-care, lifestyle change, and personal responsibility for your daily decisions when it comes to, being incarnated as a human. What I observed in my own experience and with those that I worked with is that, there is a reclamation, we could call a health reclamation, that is part of the initiatory process of actualizing, into adulthood. And I actually like to think of it as a masculine initiation when you decide to show up for yourself and to start to guard your life force, right? When you decide that it matters what you eat, what you drink, what time you go to bed, all of these lifestyle parameters, there is a spine, that comes online that confers a lot of regenerative potential. And that's why you and I, at least that's just my perspective, why you and I see the outcomes that we do clinically that are often not available through the allopathic management model that stems from a child psychology of the victim, right? That says that, this is bad and wrong. Reality as it is a problem. And I'm going to apply force and the power of my will over that which I cannot control to continue to engage this cycle of my own disempowerment and helplessness, right? So that doesn't get you where you want to go. And you can take this other path and it will take you quite far, right? Like to rid yourself of diagnoses, to shed pharmaceuticals, to come into a relationship to your own body and its expression that is not chiefly predicated on fear, but allows for fear to be one of the ingredients that are, swirling around in your energetics, but not the decision maker, right? Like that can take you very far in your life. But what I observed is, as you referenced, that so many of us on this path continue to have dysfunctional relationships, unfulfilling dynamics with our own children, so in parenting, continue to have, all sorts of frustrating patterns when it comes to finance. And perhaps if you're an entrepreneur, recurrent patterns that you would rather not see recur in your business. And I began to see the same threads woven through these other relational arenas that I observed in the health space, and which could be summarized as, victim consciousness, right? Victim stories that we tell. Whenever we imagine that, life can be navigated through the what I call the good bad split. Whenever we imagine that our job is to find ourselves on the side of goodness and rightness, and to avoid being perceived and experienced as bad and wrong, there is a split that we are maintaining. And whatever lives in the shadowy realms of whatever you define as bad and wrong through your own judgment and complaint holds a lot of vital force. It holds a lot of eros, as I would call it, right? So a lot of what you are, what you might otherwise experience as your vitality is locked up behind your own shame and self rejection. So, whenever we are engaged in these dynamics where we imagine that we know better how somebody else should be behaving, that we know better how the world should be existing than is currently available, it's possible that we are in this stage of the Jungian individuation process where we are projecting parts of ourselves onto, and I've learned it can be, organizations, it can be huge institutions, it can even be like ideological thought forms, and that we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to go hunting for these dimensions of our soul that we have projected outward, and to claim not only, these aspects of ourselves so that we have permission to be more of ourselves as we are less of who we thought we were. But we also get these gifts of this life force, right? We get to feel what I have come to conclude is one of the principal drivers, right? I don't think it's really happiness that we're after. It's aliveness. We get to feel more alive. And I remember the switch point for me was a couple of weeks after I chose to leave my second marriage, that I was in a state of disability, essentially, uh, just immense grief and confusion and terror and huge feelings that I couldn't remember having encountered, at least not since probably early childhood. And I was curled up on the couch, like a blanket over me, with like snot running down my face. And I had been like that. I think I had like a date and a matcha, that week. And I was just in despair. And I remember having this little glimmer. It was like a little sparkly feeling of like, this is interesting, right? Like there's more to this than just bad, right? This horrible feeling I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy is not all bad. There's something here that I kind of like. And maybe I kind of like it because I've spent so much of my life, as I know many women do, uh, living behind what I refer to as like a glass wall. And so even the celebratory moments, even the peak experiences, I feel like somewhat separate from them, right? Like they feel a bit hollow. And that's not happening now, right? Like, so it wasn't happening in that moment where I felt such big energy in my body. And that's when I decided to like do something with it. And I've always loved to dance, and certainly wasn't otherwise thinking about dancing in that moment. I was very busy feeling bad for myself. And I did. I put on some music and I decided to see what would happen if I would just like move with that energy. And and the rest is history, because then I decided to, take all of the related impulses to that initial moment of what I now refer to as emotional alchemy, where I turned this dark, unwanted, rejecting energy into sensuality, into pleasure, into ultimately creativity. Right. So, how does that arc happen? I never experienced that natively as a child, because most of the time when we have unwanted feelings, we're told, stop crying, calm down, I'll give you something to cry about, shut up, go to your room. So we don't experience the natural arc, the alchemical arc of these emotional energies, where we get to see that there's laughter on the other side of tears, that there's almost always, right? I haven't experienced otherwise, some sort of creative spark that attends these these intense emotional states that we would often suppress or avoid, not knowing their nature, right? Not understanding what it is that they're here to bring. So that really brought me into this new realm of my life where um, I lit my reputation on fire. And I've come to understand that, and you tell me what you think, but that reputation is one of the most valuable aspects of a man's experience, right? Of the masculine. Reputation is very important. And I was very identified with my reputation, as, all the things, a pedigreed, MD, and I never used profanity and I always dressed professionally. And I really kept my personal life very separate from my public profile, with a few exceptions, like, sharing about my relationship, et cetera. But in terms of like the way that I would play, with my girlfriends or my daughters, I never shared things like that. And I followed this inner drive to just see what the hell would happen if I did the thing I had told myself would ruin me. And and that's what led me to understand the nature of this reclamation process, that when you move in the direction of where you're not allowed to go, and I'll speak as a woman, uh, there is a whole another experience of yourself that is awaiting you. And there was a lot of programming, which I'm sure we'll touch on, that I had to work with. A lot of the woman on woman hate, and a lot of the ways in which I had constrained myself into a very narrow definition of the kind of woman I was allowed to be. And no one was doing that to me, right? So all of these persecutory, violating, patriarchal men weren't doing that to me. Um, my mom wasn't doing it to me. My friends weren't doing it to me. Who was doing this to me? It was me. It was me keeping me uh, in a very small version of myself. And so moving through that programming, I came to understand was probably some of the most difficult work I've ever done. And so I really intended to curate all of the resources that I made contact with in this 3-year journey, um, that were really offered to me, I like to say, by other women who held out a hand in the dark to me and said, "I'm already over here. This is the way." And so I've really curated all of those, put them all together in a way that I think is very, um, gosh, like I wish I had. I wish I had my own book 3 years ago, just to know, like, here's the terrain, right? So when you go on a heroine's journey, for somebody to say, like, here are some of the things you might encounter, and here's some useful tools, put them in your purse, is extraordinary. And I am delighted to be able to offer that to whomever finds themselves on the threshold of their unlived life as a woman.
Right. Well, I'm sure that, Kelly, even if someone is informing themselves with your wisdom, that they're still going to have unique aspects on their own journey, right? And I think that's really important that you have that experience because, we all have our own real identity and direction in life, right? Which is what you're talking about reclaiming, I think. So you've touched on many of the cultural constraints, and some of these are even legal philosophies, right? Like the infantilization of society. There's the
Yeah.
legal doctrine of parens patriae, right, which governs a lot of mental health law, right, which means that the state is the father, right? And you've talked about mommy medicine and daddy government a lot. We've talked about suppression of the true identity, and perhaps part of that involves uh, putting specific aspects on women, incentivizing unnatural gender roles. And
Mhm.
like you talked a little bit about the reputation, I think, reputation uh, for women has a different context, right? Because at least when I was in high school, it had to do with how easily you give up your sexuality to boys. Whereas a man's reputation is based on their, professional development and success and stature in the community and such, right? So there are obviously different versions of it, and I think,
Although we've taken on both, I would say. And
yeah,
that's, what I
I was
refer
going to
to as
mention
like,
that.
yeah, exactly. So this weird place we find ourselves in. Yeah.
Right. And, and I think the way that you indulged your own path, right, probably risked your reputation in all those realms. But obviously you came through this and feel a lot more true to yourself now and have experienced the results or of this path so far in your life. What do you think the historical forces are that have brought about, this situation in our present day culture?
Mm. So it's not going to surprise anybody listening to consider the possibility that many of the seemingly organic grassroots movements, whether we're talking about feminism or the sexual liberation movement or even the New Age,
And they're
were
all very intimately related, all those three
exactly.
movements.
Yeah, they have quite similar intentions and end goals. And I could speak a little bit to that, but that they were strategically seeded and implemented. And if we just look at the feminist movement, while it seems like women have been oppressed for millennia, and look at us, we couldn't even drive a car or sign a loan or vote uh, through another lens. The taxpayer base was doubled. Children were institutionalized into, internment camps called schools, and the nuclear family. Probably we should stop calling it that, but anyway, the family structure. This, you
Maybe the
know,
natural family.
yeah, I like it. Thank you. The natural family. That this is amazing how pervasive the terminology is. But the natural family needed to be dismantled in order for a higher level of operational control to be implemented. And all of that was achieved through the feminist movement. However, I would say the most nefarious, and I'll take a less victim-y perspective in a moment, the most nefarious perspective is actually pitting men against women. Right. So engendering this warfare that is so normative now psychologically that we imagine like, oh, of course, it's always been this way and it always will be this way, like men are from Mars kind of a thing. However, the depths of this tension and the absence of any movement toward regenerating, reconciling, or repairing the dynamics between men and women. There's not a branch of feminism, and there are many, uh, that speaks to how is it that we can come to live in harmony, in complementarity as men and women. There is this abdication of awareness that we as women, whether you could have put every man in existence into the reject pile. It doesn't matter. You could be a lesbian with no intention to ever, have a sexual encounter with a man. As long as you live, you are still walking the earth with men, period. And there's a biological reality. There's a biological correlate to that on a system level that we ignore and allow ourselves to be gaslit around when we say that mimicking men, so I would say the men that we fear fundamentally, when we mimic them and we allow ourselves to be colonized, by the hegemony of male values as women, that we will finally feel fulfilled because we'll be free and independent and we'll be able to fuck like men and work like men and participate as cogs in the wheel of society, just like men. And then we will finally feel free. And of course, the tension of this, the irony, the shadow of it is that in rejecting men, mimicking them, we are actually rejecting our own feminine nature, our biology, our roles, and these natural contracts that I believe are meant to exist between men and women. So, the less
Kelly,
victimy.
this is
Tell me.
sorry to interrupt, but
No, no,
this
not at
this
all.
is
I could go
this
on
is
forever,
so
but
fascinating what you're saying here, right? Is that basically, by women trying to be more like men and competing with men, right? Ultimately, that's not really going to be a satisfying way to go. And it disrupts male female partnerships and relationships, even
Right.
in the society at large, right? So if you
Right.
look back at the origins of the first wave of feminism, right, which is about the suffrage movement predominantly, what most people don't know is that there were many, many more women who were opposed to suffrage, and they actually had grassroots campaigns, and there were polls done in various states that showed, overwhelming majority were against it. And so I saw some of the pamphlets that they wrote, and they were saying the exact same thing. Basically, we don't want to get involved in dirty men's politics because it is beneath us and it will lower our status. Right. And, the right to vote used to be tied to registering for the draft,
Mhm.
and being a volunteer firefighter. And those were not roles that women wanted to be in either, because, right, it's natural. I mean, look at throughout history who are the ones who were charged with defending from violence. It's always been the men. They were
Right.
sent off to war, and they put their life on the line to
Right.
protect women. And the women of that day recognized that, and but also saw that they exercised their power through other avenues, through advocacy, through their influence on their husbands and children, especially the children, because the reason why they had to develop the compulsory schooling indoctrination system that you mentioned is because of taking the influence away from the parents
Right.
and being able to program the children, because you can bring about major cultural changes very, very quickly to just train children with minds that are easily malleable. I mean, look at with the transhuman agenda right now. If you look at adults in the population versus young people, you see vast differences in how they
Yes.
think about these issues.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the zero sum game psychology, right? So, this idea that you can defeat and win over that which you are fundamentally afraid is a part of the psycho-spiritual maybe evolution that we are in the midst of, right? So if we think about the stages, right, of
Right, right.
the
Will you just
man-woman
define
dynamic.
zero sum game to make it clear for the
For
audience?
sure.
Because I know people have heard that term, but they may not think about it in a relationship, for example.
Mhm. Yeah. So if I could say that there is a key, and I'm sure you would agree, a key to a healthy romantic relationship or marriage, it would be that you experience your mate as being on the same team as you. Right. So fundamentally, you're on the same team. So feminism has espoused this notion that we will win over men. Men will lose and we will win. So it's like a villainous psychology. And you'll find most of these so-called grassroots activist impulses have a lot of villainy at their core, where we are going for blood, right? Like we want the suffering, punishment. We want the absolution that will come with the prostration of the enemy. And that is really baked into a whole layer of human psychology that I think we are on the brink of maturing beyond. And that's how I like to see it, right? So if you look into the past dynamics between men and women, there certainly was, if we believe what we've been told, like a more primitive, I'll look out for myself, you look out for yourself kind of, you know, rudimentary dynamics between men and women. The the movement that took us beyond the 1950s housewife kind of a model, right? Where there was polarity, right? There's the man has this role, the woman has this role, the children have this role, but there is not often a sense that each of these, men and women are taking the best interest of the other into their heart. Right? It's more from the psychology of I'm going to get my needs met, and the woman is thinking about her needs, and it's kind of like an every woman, every man for himself kind of a position to be in. What these engineered movements, so we talked about the sexual liberation movement, the New Age, and feminism, what they ultimately have accomplished is, interestingly, the neutralization of a lot of these polarity based dynamics, right? So the pendulum has swung from a segregation between women's values and expression and men's values and expression into this sort of like neutralization of the polarity where men are quite feminized, right? So they're, doing their yoga, feeling their feelings. They're feeling constrained by, the corporatocracy in so many ways, and they're running off to surf in Bali. And women are masculinized, right? So we are women like me, right? Who've climbed the corporate ladder, who are, essentially functioning as their own entities, right? So I am in many ways the expression of feminist success, where I've gotten to this place in my life where I actually don't need a man. That's what I would tell myself, right? I don't need a man. What do I need a man for? I pay my own, way, and I take care of my kids, and I've got me. And so this this neutralization impulse is not accidentally also expressing itself as we are encountering, this wholesale assault on, um, on the sex gender identification spectrum, let's say. So we're in this moment where it seems like, wow, they really pulled a number on us. I would like to think of it, and I choose to think of it in my, more sovereign moments as being just the natural progression of things, right? That it's not like the bad people did this to us. It's like it needed to be this way so that we could move beyond this neutralized realm and actually make choices, right? That I can choose as a woman because I don't have to get married, right? I don't need a man to support me. So if I choose to be, as my, colleague Laura Doyle would call it, a surrendered wife, if I choose that, that's very powerful, right? And it's a kind of power that has never really had the conditions to fully manifest, right? And if a man is choosing, and I'm always careful to speak, on the part of men because I don't have any idea really, but like I imagine that if you're choosing to guard your woman, to care for your woman, you're choosing to take on the provider, the protector role, when you could have a 50-50 egalitarian thing going on where you're both, paying the rent together kind of a thing, and that would be totally socially normative. If you're choosing that, it has a different kind of currency of life force infused in that intention. So we are at a moment in man-woman relating, probably the history, at least recent history of the human experience, where we are maturing the dynamic into devotional divinity, I would say, right? Where we really have an opportunity to orient towards one another with regard and with a commitment to something bigger than, just our little moment here on this plane. And that, I think, is the spiritual opportunity that I have oriented towards. And I have found that it has the same exact ingredients as the spiritual opportunity that Reclaiming Your Health does, where there is an uncomfortable level of personal responsibility that is asked. And a lot of the areas that I focus on when it comes to women, because, I no longer identify, of course, as an ideological feminist, certainly not a neoliberal feminist. However, I have come to orient myself around the extraordinary power that women have that is totally untapped. And a couple of the arenas that we are really giving it away. And one of them is, you referenced, is in our status when it comes to our sexual access. Another is in our experience as wives, our experience in committed relationships, where we often get into dynamics that leave us feeling bitter and resentful, micromanaging and controlling the men that we then are frustrated are not showing up as trustworthy, respectable, and dominant men in our lives.
The whole time
Yeah.
you were describing that, the phrase happy wife, happy life kept coming
Yeah.
up for me, right? Because that is, well, if you sacrifice and let your wife win, then it's not happy really. It means that then she won't be trying to dominate you all the time.
Yeah. The
Right.
the the dynamics are so baked in that we choose these men. And remember, we don't have to, right? It's kind of like, you don't have to you don't have to choose to have a baby. If you do, then a lot of what I teach around mothering is like how to actually align with the choice that you've made. You've chosen to have this child. You've chosen this man as your partner. How do you get coherent around that? Well, it requires an uncomfortable level of maturing your victim consciousness into sovereign consciousness. And what that looks like is understanding that the inner work required of you to be the bad and wrong one. I call it wearing the villain crown. The inner work required of you to know how to master your own self relationship, and especially when it comes to emotions, to actually learn how to feel emotions and to work with the alchemical nature that I referenced earlier. And then also to see where you are trying, what I like to say, to buy eggs from the hardware store, to see where you are insisting that something be available that you know in your bones is not. You know this. As a woman, you have this intuition. It's built into your vessel, and we ignore it. And that suppression of awareness of what I call the little no is what leads us to take poor bargains, right? It leads us to make these agreements with ourselves in our lives to say yes to things that are fundamentally a no. And we've known it the whole time, right? So that level of responsibility certainly isn't for everyone. Um, but I'm here to tell you it's worth it. And certainly to help, to help women to move through the stages of maturing into what it looks like to take this level of responsibility on the daily, and to end these patterns and cycles that leave us feeling bitter and resentful and in a complaint culture where the only way we know how to connect to anybody is through our grievances about the ways in which our lives are not lining up the way, we wish they would. So
Kelly, you touched on the sexual revolution, and there's, an observable trend in the younger generations now of, right, increased promiscuity among women, increased, production of decentralized pornography, and increased consumption by men. How is that, how important is that playing into this subversion, and, how is it affecting women on an individual level?
yeah. So again, when we deny the fundamental differences between men and women, we are ripe for a lot of these agendas that would bait our victim story as women and lead us to demand exactly what it is that could never even have been imposed. Okay. So like we've seen this, right? In every agenda, you play on the victimhood of a certain faction of the population, and they end up demanding, right, the intervention, the vaccine, the legislation. They end up demanding what would have been pretty tough to just impose out of the blue. And it's just fascinating how this works, right? So here we are led to believe that we're just built the same as men. Everybody loves pleasurable sex. Sex is, should be freely available. Any constraints on that is an echo of some puritanical, legacy we're ready to shed. And Louise Perry wrote a book called The Case Against the Sexual Revolution that I summarize in my own book. I think it's excellent. And she calls it chronological snobbery, right? Where we look down our nose at the way that these poor women before us used to live and how constrained they were by their sexual ethics. And we imagine that we have achieved something valuable. So, what is this valuable thing we've achieved? We can have sex like men can. Why? Because of birth control, right? Because of contraception. And we've been disabused of our stewardship of the species. I mean, to be able to pull this off, right, where women actually feel so disconnected from their primary role as, you know, the vessel of life for the species, where we imagine that that's a burden. And I 100%, I took birth control continuously for 12 years. Okay. So I am a product of this. This brainwashing. But when we imagine that it's that role is burdensome, and that to abdicate that responsibility, right? So you could even say through medicalized birth, through formula feeding, through birth control. And I actually think, and I'm sure you would agree, that antidepressants and psychotropics play also a very specific role in offering women the perspective that their emotions, right? Like what it is that might otherwise be unwanted or unruly could just be subdued, right? So the henchmen of the sexual liberation movement very much fall into the pharmaceutical arena from my perspective. But when we imagine that we can now have sex just like men and that that's actually what we want, we are engaging in like an extraordinary gaslighting, because the truth is, even sociological research has demonstrated that we have more of an interest as women in monogamous pairing relative to men who have more of an interest in sexual diversity. Right. And you can even get into teachings like David Data's teachings around like the masculine essence and the feminine essence. And one is seeking singularity. Right. So the feminine seeks the singularity of the masculine, and the masculine seeks the multiplicity of the feminine, that these are energetic dynamics that we are denying when we think that we are the same. And, she talks about how you just have to look at the difference between, sexual harassment and bullying, or violence and rape, to know that sex has meaning. And when we deny that it has meaning, and we say it's just like any other, behavioral phenomenon, we are violating not only, what we just wake up and feel as women, but also what most of the research suggests, which is that we don't have this in common. So where are we left when we are supporting a cultural revolution that actually is empowering not women, but the consumers of all of the products, as you mentioned, like porn, sex working? The consumers of these products are men, right? So we're empowering, in fact, the indiscriminate engagement of meaningless, no strings attached sexuality for men. Isn't that funny how we did that, right? Like how we found ourselves in this situation. And then, because of the way that it ties in to the feminist movement, we have these egalitarian dynamics where we are bringing home half of the money. We're doing 70% of the household labor, invisible labor. And in that way as well, we have like been duped, right? So we ended up advocating for, actually supporting who it was that we were fighting against, and demanding an entitlement to behave, in the same way as. So a lot of what those who criticize the movement and hookup culture and associated, because porn is a whole other conversation, but I'm sure you would agree that one of the unfortunate side effects, if not intentional effects of pornography, is to render men cuckolds, right? To create a whole generation of cucks where these men are used to watching other men and women have sex, right? So that disconnection of men from their healthy sexuality, from their healthy aggression, has been part of the ingredients of, leading us to this place where people are having less fulfilling sex. This current generation is seemingly having less sex than ever before. And there are these institutional, the apparatus of marriage, if you will, of monogamy. These institutional sanctions were really set up to protect women and children's interests. And we have been pit against them as if they are the enemy. So a lot of the reclamation of courtship, I like to call it, is, what women are, it's a zeitgeist right now where women are recognizing that we do protect our status, not through our productivity, right? Which is, I think, what a lot of us would have imagined our reputation is, right? Our productivity, our achievement, all of the ways we perform as workers in society. But actually through the guarding of our sexual energy, the guarding of our sexual access, and we have an opportunity to inspire men to rise into their fuller expression by only allowing access to men who represent father and provider archetypes, right? And to not allow access otherwise. that is an experience of our own value as women that we have somehow been duped into imagining was expendable. And the other area where I focus a lot on the power that we have as women to, alchemize and transmute a lot of these programs is actually in our mothering of sons, because it wouldn't be in this situation if there weren't generations of women who have not worked on their fear of men, their experience of being injured and harmed by men, and the ways in which they imagine they'll only feel safe if men are nice and kind to them and appease them. And we mother our sons this way. I mean, I personally don't have sons, but I would have, had I'm sure, we mother our sons in this way that is representative of like an energetic castration, where we think that boys need to please us as mommies. They need to regulate our emotions that we don't know, we don't have the tools to do for ourselves. And then we raise these lambs. But as women, what we're looking for, right, in adult men is like the wolf, right? So it's this these distortions and these inversions that have led us to a very unfulfilling place. And we have extraordinary power as women to unknit and undo and progress so many aspects of these dynamics that are really holding our pleasure and our fulfillment hostage in ways that we would otherwise imagine were unresolvable, I think.
It's so ironic that the culture, right, promoting women as, enjoying sex like men, and you would think it would lead to more experience of people having sex, right? But the opposite has, and now maybe in a small segment, right, of the population, there is increased sexual behavior, but at least for most men, it seems like a small group of men are connecting with all of the, all of the promiscuous women, and all the
Right.
other guys are being left out. And they, would probably be the monogamous, head of household type of guys who really want that fulfillment. And in my life, I know that even though I may have a tendency, right, to be attracted to a lot of different women, I know that when I just have one woman that I'm deeply involved with, that it's the most fulfilling. And even if,
Yes.
I may engage thoughts here and there, I know that if I ever actually pursued those things, that it would be a bad experience, right? Because it would be empty, because it wouldn't be based on that deep intimacy, right? That sacred aspect of it is not there, right? It's impersonal. It's physical. It's like having an ice cream sundae when you're on vacation, right? And then afterwards, you get a bellyache and you feel guilty about it. Just really, we've lost our way here, and it's great to have a voice like yours helping us, start on the journey back to engaging in our true and natural gender identity and individual identity, free from these toxic, subversive, and I believe purposeful cultural influences that are leading society in directions that we don't really want to go, and will not be fulfilled, happy, or feel alive. So, Kelly, can you tell the audience information you have available about your book? Where can people get it? I believe there was a workshop or a master class that you have available as well. Can you tell the folks about that?
Sure. Sure. Yeah. I mean, as you were speaking, there are just so many things coming to my mind about like this, this opportunity that we have, right? Because even when you talk about like the proclivity that men have to interest themselves in like many women, right? That I'm a huge David Data fan, and I summarize a lot of his work in this book. I think, he would say that there's a stage of development that you get to where you recognize that there's actually more freedom, right? So if that's the primary value of the masculine, there's actually more freedom available to you in a monogamous dyad than there is outside of one. And that freedom is also the ability to express on your mission as a man in a way with the support and energetics of a woman beside you that you don't have on your own. And this is where, things like the red pill movement and all of this angry feminism, there is not a deep spiritual understanding of what becomes available through complementarity. And yes, we're talking erotic and romantic, but it's not just that. I mean, I'll tell a brief story and then I'll answer your question about my handyman, right? It's because I was talking to him and I've worked, this guy has supported me for many years and, helped me with all the things. Um, as I was imagining, that here I am, this liberated feminist who doesn't need men, right? And meanwhile, I have like all of these men helping me to fix and build every single thing. I'm talking to him one day, and he's telling me how his son is thinking about becoming a welder. And I don't know, you probably know about welding. I don't know anything about it, but he said it's like actually like a super dangerous job.
This must
And
be underwater welding.
I have no idea. I have no idea, but
It's the holy grail of trades because there's like hazard pay involved, and there's always a demand because they like repair seafaring vessels using
yeah.
commerce, right?
Yeah, so he said it's super lucrative. So it must be what you're talking about. So he's saying, it's really lucrative, but it's super damaging, dangerous rather. And I was telling him, I said, wow, that's so interesting because I was really steeped in this mindset that, you know, men have been responsible for the suffering of women for millennia, and that it's our turn, to get ours as women. And I told him that I've been working on exposing the shadowy aspects of that belief. And that part of how I've been working on it is coming into greater appreciation for men in the world. And so one of the ways that I do that is I'll walk around and I'll look at all the buildings and the signs and the structures and the things. And I'll look at construction sites and I'll recognize like that these men are doing all of that. And I will then further recognize that, maybe there's like a 1% of men who are oppressing and abusing, right? All of people, right? Like all across the aisle of the sexes, we've all had a rough time. Okay. And um, and I told him, I said, I just often these days just feel so appreciative of how much risk and how little reward and acknowledgement, like how much thankless, merciless work men do in the world. And he looks at me and he says, we do it all for you. Every time I say this, I feel teary. Because it was such a deep moment for me. I just felt like this remembrance of the natural contract, that I'm a woman, I incarnated as a woman, I get to just wake up and be. And in doing so, I inspire men to act in service. And that contract is built in, right? And you can look in the marital covenant and you can see like how men are built to fulfill, as you said, the happiness of their woman. And that means that the woman's responsibility is to have a very pure relationship to her own desire and to her impulses. That's what she is responsible for. And this beautiful contract has been so forgotten that in the remembrance of it, it just takes a moment like that to feel like, wow.
I can totally harness the feeling that I have when I see, a shining example of feminine expression is the impulse to me is what can I do for her? you know?
Yes, yes. I mean, I've had that experience with you personally as a man in my life, where I feel that you have that ready. Um, it's just you're wired that way.
Right.
And
And this can
I think
happen in
most
such
yeah,
subtle ways, right? You can be, it could be a clerk in a store that
exactly.
I'll want to teach them or offer them some health advice or help them pick something up, and it's just like whatever there can be. It's totally natural and it's fulfilling, not just from any gratitude, but just internally.
And as women, we have come to believe that that's actually something that we derive our fulfillment from, helping, in the like being productive, being seen as useful almost, right? So we imagine, and of course the feminist egalitarian, psychology that says you should bring your money to the table, woman, has also enculturated us around this idea that we are here to also do, right? Like we're here to do also. And it's not to say that we're not, but when we align with that value system, there is a thirst and a hunger that rests at the end of that rainbow that is quite different from what we were promised. And until we can learn to rest into being, learn to receive as women, learn to value our energy as our primary gift, that is expressed through our desire to come back into a truce, with what I call the little yes inside. There's a hollow experience, that we will access. And that's what, I feel super excited about. So yes, I'm hosting a free masterclass. It's on the 27th, where I am teaching my three favorite tools in this arena around the earliest stages of the reclamation of no, because I teach first the reclamation of no and then the reclamation of yes. And the idea really is to get you to a place where you feel unbothered by the things that used to define your complaint based life. And all of these relics of disappointment and resentment uh, begin to offer the gifts they've been wanting to give you the whole time. So there's an experience of not only the pleasure of being in this female body, but also the power, the superpowers, that we have to manifest and to um, create, that we have been disconnected from, as you and I would agree, by design. And so I'll be sharing that, and also the companion program to my book, because I recognize that unlike my first books, this is not work to be done alone. It just doesn't work when you don't have other women who are holding that gaze, who are offering the permission to be the bad and wrong version of yourself. Uh, it's virtually impossible to cross. I don't think we're designed to come into our actualization without other women. I think, as you know, men are meant to do this work with men, women are meant to do this work with women. And I just like to think of myself as being one of the only spaces that offers this, sort of comprehensive opportunity to mature victim consciousness from the health perspective all the way to sexuality and relationships. So I'm pretty excited for the potential disruption that this work can represent, because I always have that mischievous side online.
Well, Kelly, thank you so much for coming and talking about these issues today. And everyone out there, make sure you register for Kelly's free masterclass coming up later this month in June, so that you can learn to reclaim your womanly superpowers, as she puts it. And I definitely want to engage with some of these women after they have their superpowers back. So, and definitely check out Kelly's book, which I started reading, and it's really good. I know you'll enjoy it. And we'll see everyone back on another Healthy Living Interviews soon.